Hello, this is Dr. Chembitsky and welcome to my environmental science screencast. Today we are going to talk about the prophecy of modern conservation. Hello and welcome back to our discussion about the history of environmental movement. So today we will talk a little bit more about pragmatic utilitarian conservation, and in particular we are going to talk about one very important book, the title of the book is Man and Nature. So here we go, Man and Nature. The book was published in 1864, and the person who wrote the book was George Perkins Marsh, which was a geographer, as you can see over here. But he was very well educated person because he was also, by education, he was also a lawyer. He was a politician, he was a diplomat, and he traveled around the world, and especially in the Mediterranean. He served as American diplomat in Turkey and Italy. So, as a very well-educated person, Marsh read classics, including Plato, and personally observed the damage caused by excessive grazing, by goats and sheep, and by deforestation of steep hillsides. He was alarmed by wanton destruction and profligate waste of resources still occurring in the American frontier in his lifetime, and he warned the people about the ecological consequences of wasting the resources. And his book was very important to start this movement that now is called the conservation movement. And this is what we will discuss today. So here's the actual book. As you can see, so the book is called Man and Nature, or Physical Geography as Modified by Human Action. So right here, we already looking at the human impact on the environment. So this is the original book. As you can see here, the book is available from the Library of the United States Congress, and I'm not sure you can actually check it out because it's a rarity. However, it's available to everybody in electronic format free of charge. And so the book has been bound, so this is not the original cover of the book, and amazingly we can actually flip the pages and so to speak pretend this is the real book. So you can see that it has been bound by the Library of United States Congress, so because it's pretty old, from 1800s, and if we open it up we will see the title of the book, Man and Nature, or Physical Geography as Modified by Human Action. So written by George Perkins Marsh, and you can see the date of original publication, 1864. So if I zoom it in a little bit, you will see that the book also was acquired originally on September 7th, 1885 by the Library of the Navy Department. So publication is 1864, and the book was printed in London. So pretty much altogether we have here 586 pages, and we can go ahead and read the preference. The list of bibliography follows the title page, and then we actually can read the book like it would be a real thing, right? So the book is actually quite interesting, and lots of things that are described in the book are quite alarming. So first of all, let's take a look at the person who wrote this book, George Perkins Marsh. So we already know that he was an American diplomat in Constantinople and Greece between 1849 and 1854. So Constantinople is actually the former name of Istanbul, so this is in Turkey. And so originally, George Perkins Marsh was from Vermont. He was a linguist, a scholar, and these are the years, when he lived. He extensively traveled across Europe and Mediterranean area, and later, from 1861 to 1882, he was the American ambassador to the Kingdom of Italy. So Man and Nature was first published in 1864, and Perkins continued working on the book until his death, and it actually had 3 editions, and the 3rd edition appeared in 1885. So when Marsh traveled in Europe, he experienced very ancient civilizations where the humans interacted with the environment for centuries, and he found a lot of environmental degradation. And unfortunately, he also observed similar degradation in his native Vermont when the resources were exhausted by humans. And this is something that alarmed him and made him want to write this book. So another paragraph here is very important. So because Marsh is the founder of the pragmatic conservation movement, very frequently we call him a prophet of modern conservation, right? So this is something that I frequently ask on the midterm exam. I ask, who do we call a prophet of modern conservation? And you already know the answer, George Perkins Marsh. So his book, coming as it did well before the conservation movement, was enormously influential. So it had its root in Marsh recognition that human activity had greatly altered the Vermont landscape, removing trees, leading to erosion and flooding. He showed early concerns with methods for preventing damage and restoring the land. When he went to Europe, he found similar changes has been happening for much longer, with more profound results, and efforts to prevent damage and restore the land had considerable history. So the next paragraph is also quite important here. So we need to understand that it has never been Marsh's aim to encourage the restoration or preservation of wilderness. So, and here what he said that the earth was given to man for usufruct. And usufruct is a made-up word. It doesn't exist in English language. And this is a word Marsh introduces in his book. And it means to use the fruit of. So we have to use the fruit of nature, not for consumption or waste. So resources should remain to benefit future generations. And now, according to George Perkins Marsh, stewardship was the point, a concept which later took a central place in conservation movement and which lies at the root of sustainability. And you have already read about sustainability. So these two terms, stewardship, environmental stewardship, and sustainability, are very frequently mentioned on the news and TV and newspapers, etc., different debates. And both terms when we talk about them, correspond to pragmatic resource conservation. So stewardship, so we have to take care of the resources for future generation, and sustainability, we described that in the past as well. So the sustainable development doesn't allow the resource to be exhausted. For example, if you're going to cut the trees because we need wood to construct furniture, we have to replant new trees. And if we don't, this is not sustainable, right? So the manufacturing process at certain point will stop because the resource is exhausted. However, if we continue replanting the trees, then this manufacturing process will be continuing for many generations to come. And this is what sustainability is. So as David Lowenthal wrote in his introduction to the centennial edition of Made in Nature, so anyone wielding a hoe or an axe knows what he is doing, but before Marsh, no one has assessed the cumulative effect of all axes and hoes. For him, the conclusion was inescapable. Man depends on soil, water, plants, and animals, but in obtaining them, he unwittingly destroys the fabric of nature. Therefore, man must learn to understand his environment and how he affects it. For his own sake, not for nature alone, man must restore and maintain it as long as he tenants the earth. So here we go, another very important idea, that George Perkins Marsh was the first person who evaluated the cumulative effect of all axes and hoes. So just think about it, right? Everybody can do some damage to the nature, and maybe this is not a big deal, but what would be the cumulative effect if everybody does it? Like in a simple example, you're driving along the highway and you consumed a can of soda, and now the can is empty. So what you can do, you can roll down your window and just throw that empty can of soda to the curbside, right? What a big deal. It's just one can of soda, right? And it's empty now. Not a big deal. But now imagine what would be the cumulative effect of this action if not just you, but if everybody will do this today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, then there will be no free space. On the curbside, it will be completely littered, and it will be covered by trash and garbage, and this is what the cumulative effect is. So if one individual maybe doesn't do a lot of damage, when we put all these individuals, all axes and hoes together, the impact it's quite considerable. And obviously before the book by George Perkins Marsh, many people just didn't think about an idea of this type of a cumulative effect. Well, I hope that you feel how important and influential the book by George Perkins Marsh was at that time, and actually all these ideas are still serve as a foundation of environmental stewardship and sustainability. And the conservation movement leaders, again, preach the same exact ideas nowadays as well. So I would like to share some passages from this book with you. And obviously, we don't have time to read together all 300-something pages of the book. But if you would like to do so, you know where to find it. You can go to the website of Library of the United States Congress. And so what I did for you, I have a summary of the book, and there are some passages that will allow us to have pretty good idea what this book is about. So we are going to read it together. Usually when we have an in-person class, I bring the book to class and or handout with passages from the book, and we read it together. But we will do it a little bit differently because we are now in the virtual reality, so to speak. All right, so let's read some passages from Man and Nature. And periodically, we will stop and we will talk about the book. All right, so here we go.
Men. The Roman Empire, at the period of its greatest expansion, comprised the regions of the earth most distinguished by a happy combination of physical advantages. The provinces bordering on the principal and the secondary basins of the Mediterranean enjoyed a healthfulness and an equability of climate, a fertility of soil, a variety of vegetable and mineral products, and natural facilities for the transportation and distribution of exchangeable commodities, which have not been possessed in an equal degree by any territory of like extent in the Old World or the New.
So let's think about this paragraph. So George Perkins Marsh is going to describe the Mediterranean area, and this is the area where ancient civilizations flourish, such as the ancient Roman Empire or ancient Greece. And one of the reasons why those civilizations were flourishing is the abundance of natural resources, the equability of climate, the fertility of soil, the variety of vegetable and mineral products, and also multiple navigable streams, which were the routes of commerce for exchangeable transportation of exchangeable commodities, etc., etc. So this land was originally very, very fertile. And in the next paragraph, George Perkins Marsh will give us multiple examples of environmental degradation due to human activities. So let's continue reading.
Old World or the New. If we compare the present physical condition of the countries of which I am speaking, with the descriptions that ancient historians and geographers have given of their fertility and general capability of ministering to human uses, we shall find that more than one half of their whole extent, including the provinces most celebrated for the profusion and variety of their spontaneous and their cultivated products, and for the wealth and social advancement of their inhabitants, is either deserted by civilized man and surrendered to hopeless desolation, or at least greatly reduced in both productiveness and population. Vast forests have disappeared from mountain spurs and ridges, the vegetable earth accumulated beneath the trees by the decay of leaves and fallen trunks, the soil of the alpine pastures which skirted and indented the woods, and the mold of the upland fields, are washed away. Meadows, once fertilized by irrigation, are waste and unproductive, because the cisterns and reservoirs that supplied the ancient canals are broken, or the springs that fed them dried up. Rivers famous in history and song have shrunk to humble brooklets. The willows that ornamented and protected the banks of the lesser water courses are gone, and the rivulets have ceased to exist as perennial currents, because the little water that finds its way into their old channels is evaporated by the drought swamp.
All right, so let's take a look, and now we can see multiple examples of environmental degradation due to human activity. We just read about it. We know that multiple rivers are drying up, which includes some rivers which are famous in history and so on. They shrunk to humble brooklets. So the trees, such as willows that used to ornament and protect the banks of the river, now are gone. And trees are very important because the roots of the trees are actually prevent soil erosion. So rivulets, which are the smaller rivers, have ceased to exist as perennial currents. So meaning certain time of the year, those currents become very empty and there is no water in them. They're drying up, and then maybe in the rainy season the water comes back, just like perennial flowers come back every spring. So we can see also deforestation as an example of human impact. Vast forest has disappeared from mountain spurs. There is different damage to meadows that were fertilized by irrigation in the past, becoming unproductive because the system of cisterns and reservoirs constructed by humans is now broken. So there are many examples of environmental degradation. Okay, so we are talking about droughts of summer, and let's continue with this paragraph.
Conservation of summer, or absorbed by the parched earth, before it reaches the lowlands. The beds of the brooks have widened into broad expanses of pebbles and gravel, over which, though in the hot season past dryshod, in winter sea-like torrents thunder, the entrances of navigable streams is obstructed by sandbars, and harbors, once marts of an extensive commerce, are shoaled by the deposits of the rivers at whose mouths they lie, the elevation of the beds of estuaries, and the consequently diminished velocity of the streams which flow into them, have converted thousands of leagues of shallow sea and fertile lowland into unproductive and miasmatic morasses.
Once again, there is damage to the navigable streams because of the drought, because of the human activities as well, by construction projects that create sandbars and harbors. So once again, the velocity of streams is now diminished because there is less water, as people are using water, for example, to take care of agricultural projects, and pretty much that will result in decrease in the area fertility. The area becomes less productive. Okay, so let's keep reading.
Morasses. Besides the direct testimony of history to the ancient fertility of the regions to which I refer, northern Africa, the greater Arabian Peninsula, Syria, Mesopotamia, Armenia, and many other provinces of Asia Minor, Greece, Sicily, and parts of even Italy and Spain, the multitude and extent of yet remaining architectural ruins, and of decayed works of internal improvement, show that at former epochs a dense population inhabited those now lonely districts. Such a population could have been sustained only by a productiveness of soil of which we at present discover but slender traces, and the abundance derived from that fertility serves to explain how last armies, like those of the ancient Persians, and of the Crusaders and the Tartars in later ages, could, without an organized commissariat, secure adequate supplies in long marches through territories which, in our times, would scarcely afford forage for a single regiment.
So in this paragraph, George Perkins Marsh analyzes the evidence provided by ancient historians about ancient fertility of certain region of the European continent and also Asia Minor, those records prove that the land has been exhausted by human activity. Another example here tells us about big ancient armies, such as armies of Persians and the Crusaders and Tartars, that could travel pretty long distances without an organized commissariat. So what exactly does it mean? So if you think about the contemporary army of the United States or any developed countries, so we have a special chain of suppliers for the army, right, that are responsible for the food and the outfit, etc., etc. And so this chain of supply didn't exist in ancient armies. So when ancient armies of crusaders migrated long distances, how did they survive? So they rely on foraging, so they would go and collect berries in the forest, or they would be hunting or fishing, and this is how they sustain themselves without an organized commissariat or chain of supply. And that was pretty possible for huge armies like this to migrate because the productivity of land was sufficient to maintain these huge armies. And according to George Perkins Marsh, this is not the case anymore because the land has been exhausted by humans.
Regiment. The decay of these once flourishing countries is partly due, no doubt, to that class of geological causes, whose action we can neither resist nor guide, and partly also to the direct violence of hostile human force, but it is, in a far greater proportion, either the result of man's ignorant disregard of the laws of nature, or an incidental consequence of war, and of civil and ecclesiastical tyranny and misrule.
So here we go. So George Perkins Marsh is asking a question. What is the reason for this desolation, so to speak, right? And obviously, partially, he said, is due to geological causes. And there could be very destructive parts of nature, such as volcanic eruptions or earthquakes, and they can be very devastating. However, we also have the influence of man and man direct violence and direct hostility of human force that destroys the nature. And in the next paragraph here, George Perkins Marsh will specifically look at the destructiveness of man and how does it compare with the natural destructive forces. So let's read about it as well.
Destructiveness of man. Man has too long forgotten that the earth was given to him for usufruct alone, not for consumption, still less for profligate waste. Nature has provided against the absolute destruction of any of her elementary matter, the raw material of her works, the thunderbolt and the tornado, the most convulsive throes of even the volcano and the earthquake, being only phenomena of decomposition and recomposition. But she has left it within the power of man irrepressibly to derange the combinations of inorganic matter and of organic life, which through the night of aeons she had been proportioning and balancing, to prepare the earth for his habitation, when, in the fullness of time, his Creator should call him forth to enter into its possession.
Here George Perkins Marsh actually names the destructive powers of nature, such as the thunderbolt and the tornado, the volcano and the earthquake. And these are all the phenomena of decomposition and recomposition. And the main idea here is that in nature, everything is balanced, everything is in proportion. And the nature has a good ability to heal itself. So this is actually a very great idea here about balancing in nature. However, in the next paragraph, we will see how human activity can destroy the fine balance of nature, and the human activity is a lot more detrimental and a lot more dangerous for the nature compared to all these natural volcanic eruptions and thunderbolts and tornadoes, which are part of the balance, and human activity isn't.
Apart from the hostile influence of man, the organic and the inorganic world are, as I have remarked, bound together by such mutual relations and adaptations as secure, if not the absolute permanence and equilibrium of both, a long continuance of the established conditions of each at any given time and place, or at least, a very slow and gradual succession of changes in those conditions. But man is everywhere a disturbing agent. Wherever he plants his foot, the harmonies of nature are turned to discords. The proportions and accommodations which ensured the stability of existing arrangements are overthrown. Indigenous vegetable and animal species are extirpated, and supplanted by others of foreign origin. Spontaneous production is forbidden or restricted, and the face of the earth is either laid bare or covered with a new and reluctant growth of vegetable forms, and with alien tribes of animal life. These intentional changes and substitutions constitute, indeed, great revolutions, but vast as is their magnitude and importance, they are, as we shall see, insignificant in comparison with the contingent and unsought results which have flowed from them.
Let's analyze this paragraph, and what we can see here is extremely powerful writing here. So I'm going to highlight very, very strong sentences here. All right, so starts over here. But man is everywhere a disturbing agent. Think about it. Wherever he plants his foot, the harmonies of nature are turned to discords. Right? So we have this fine balance in nature that is ruined by human activity. Very, very powerful writing. Man is everywhere a disturbing agent. Wherever he plants his foot, the harmonies of nature are turned to discord. So another important moment here, so we are talking about indigenous species of plants and animals. So indigenous species are species which are native to a particular area. For example, we can say indigenous species of New Jersey pinelands, right? So what are the original species that are adapted to live in this area? And due to human activity, very frequently indigenous species are extirpated, supplanted by others of foreign origin. And this is what we call the invasive species. And the invasive species are not necessarily bad in their normal environment when they are native, but if you relocate them, they can be very, very detrimental to the new ecosystem, where they can take over the resources and endanger the indigenous species that can be completely be suffering and even eliminated. So the invasive species is a serious biological problem. And what is called here alien tribes of animal life, so that doesn't really mean directly aliens from the space, but that means invasive species. Let's continue.
The fact that, of all organic beings, man alone is to be regarded as essentially a destructive power, and that he wields energies to resist which, nature whom all material life and all inorganic substance obey, is wholly impotent, tends to prove that, though living in physical nature, he is not of her, that he is of more exalted parentage, and belongs to a higher order of existences than those born of her womb and submissive to her dictates.
Another very powerful statement here, so if you pay attention, it tells us that the problem how the humans modify the environment is because humans think they are above the nature, right? A human would think he is not of her, meaning he doesn't belong to nature, he is above all living creatures, so he is of more of exalted parentage and belongs to higher order of existence than those plants and animals and other creatures which are natural part of the natural habitat, right? And follow the rules of nature. So the humans envision themselves as superior beings, and that's why they pretty much think they are allowed to damage the nature, and that's a big problem because technically humans are just another species on the planet Earth.
There are, indeed, brood destroyers, beasts and birds and insects of prey all animal life feeds upon, and, of course, destroys other life, but this destruction is balanced by compensations. It is, in fact, the very means by which the existence of one tribe of animals or of vegetables is secured against being smothered by the encroachments of another, and the reproductive powers of species, which serve as the food of others, are always proportioned to the demand they are destined to supply. Man pursues his victims with reckless destructiveness, and, while the sacrifice of life by the lower animals is limited by the cravings of appetite, he unsparingly persecutes, even to extirpation, thousands of organic forms which he cannot consume.
Once again, we are looking at extremely powerful write-up here. So human activity is compared to brood destroyers, beasts and birds and insects of prey. So we do have predators, and the lion can run after gazelle and kill it, or the fox can go after the rabbit. But this is very different from human appetites and human activity. If a predator catches the prey, it's not because he just wants to do this. This is a way to survive because the animal is hungry, and a lion or other type of a predator is not gonna go for the next prey if they are not hungry, right? And everything in nature is balanced. So if we wouldn't have predators, we probably would have more sick and disease animals of the prey species. So there is this balance between predators and prey species, which is a fine equilibrium in nature. Man, as you can see here, pursues his victims with reckless destructiveness, while he sacrifice of life by low animals is limited by craving of appetite. Man unsparingly persecutes, even to extirpation, thousands of organic forms he cannot consume. And sometimes we can just, go and hunt because we enjoy hunting and not because we have nothing to eat. Or think about the luxury items. Think about a mink coat, right, which is not actually necessary. And there are other articles of clothing that can protect you from cold. So if somebody owns a fur coat, very expensive mink coat, this is not because they are hiding from cold. That's just mostly because it looks nice. And just think of the size of the animal mink, which is a little animal. How many animals would have to be sacrificed and skinned to create a mink coat, right? So this is pretty typical behavior of the human species when something is taken from nature, and this is something that humans can live without pretty easily. And that's the difference between those brute destroyers, beasts and birds of insects of prey, and the human species. Very big difference. Don't you agree?
The Earth was not, in its natural condition, completely adapted to the use of man, but only to the sustenance of wild animals and wild vegetation. These live, multiply their kind in just proportion, and attain their perfect measure of strength and beauty, without producing or requiring any change in the natural arrangements of surface, or in each other's spontaneous tendencies, except such mutual repression of excessive increase as may prevent the extirpation of one species by the encroachments of another. In short, without man, lower animal and spontaneous vegetable life would have been constant in type, distribution, and proportion, and the physical geography of the earth would have remained undisturbed for indefinite periods, and been subject to revolution only from possible, unknown cosmical causes, or from geological action.
So let's stop and think about this paragraph as well. So if we would eliminate human species, just theoretically, or we would have no human impact, what would happen to nature? Would nature suffer? And as a matter of fact, it would be good for the nature, because the nature would be in fine balance. There would be no disturbing power. And without man, as you can see here, low animals and spontaneous vegetable life would have been constant in type, distribution, and proportion, and the physical geography of the earth would have remained undisturbed for indefinite period of time. So there is this fine balance in nature which will continue indefinitely if we eliminate human activity. Isn't it sad?
But man, the domestic animals that serve him, the field and garden plants the products of which supply him with food and clothing, cannot subsist and rise to the full development of their higher properties, unless brute and unconscious nature be effectually combated, and, in a great degree, vanquished by human AZT. Hence, a certain measure of transformation of terrestrial surface, of suppression of natural, and stimulaflone of artificially modified productivity becomes necessary. This measure man has unfortunately exceeded. He has felled the forests whose network of fibrous roots bound the mold to the rocky skeleton of the earth, but had he allowed here and there a belt of woodland to reproduce itself by spontaneous propagation, most of the mischiefs which his reckless destruction of the natural protection of the soil has occasioned would have been averted. He has broken up the mountain reservoirs, the percolation of whose waters through unseen channels supplied the fountains that refreshed his cattle and fertilized his fields, but he has neglected to maintain the cisterns and the canals of irrigation which a wise antiquity had constructed to neutralize the consequences of its own imprudence. While he has tomed the thin glebe which confined the light earth of extensive plains, and has destroyed the fringe of semi-aquatic plants which skirted the coast and checked the drifting of the sea sand, he has failed to prevent the spreading of the dunes by clothing them with artificially propagated vegetation. He has ruthlessly warred on all the tribes of animated nature whose spoil he could convert to his own uses, and he has not protected the birds which prey on the insects most destructive to his own harvests.
Once again, the paragraph we just read gave us multiple examples of human-caused degradation of the environment.
Purely untutored humanity, it is true, interferes comparatively little with the arrangements of nature, and the destructive agency of man becomes more and more energetic and unsparing as he advances in civilization, until the impoverishment, with which his exhaustion of the natural resources of the soil is threatening him, at last awakens him to the necessity of preserving what is left, if not of restoring what has been wantonly wasted. The wandering savage grows no cultivated vegetable, fells no forest, and extirpates no useful plant, no noxious weed. If his skill in the chase enables him to entrap numbers of the animals on which he feeds, he compensates this loss by destroying also the lion, the tiger, the wolf, the otter, the seal, and the eagle, thus indirectly protecting the feebler quadrupeds and fish and fowls, which would otherwise become the booty of beasts and birds of prey. But with stationary life, or rather with the pastoral state, man at once commences an almost indiscriminate warfare upon all the forms of animal and vegetable existence around him, and as he advances in civilization, he gradually eradicates or transforms every spontaneous product of the soil he occupies.
Once again, look at this powerful writing. Humans are destroying many different animals: the lion, the tiger, the wolf, the otter, the seal, and the eagle, etc., etc. And in this paragraph, George Perkins Marsh actually talks about humans literally declaring a war to nature. So this is not just taking the resources with nature, but declaring a war, the war action against the nature.
The ravages committed by man subvert the relations and destroy the balance which nature had established between her organized and her inorganic creations, and she avenges herself upon the intruder, by letting loose upon her defaced provinces destructive energies hitherto kept in check by organic forces destined to be his best ausflyeries, but which he has unwisely dispersed and driven from the field of action. When the forest is gone, the great reservoir of moisture stored up in its vegetable mold is evaporated, and returns only in deluges of rain to wash away the parched dust into which that mold has been converted. The well-wooded and humid hills are turned to ridges of dry rock, which encumbers the low grounds and chokes the water courses with its debris, and except in countries favored with an equable distribution of rain through the seasons, and a moderate and regular inclination of surface, the whole earth, unless rescued by human art from the physical degradation to which it tends, becomes an assemblage of bald mountains, of barren, turfless hills, and of swampy and malarious plains. There are parts of Asia Minor, of northern Africa, of Greece, and even of Alpine Europe, where the operation of causes set in action by man has brought the face of the earth to a desolation almost as complete as that of the moon, and though, within that brief space of time which we call the historical period, they are known to have been covered with luxuriant woods, verdant pastures, and fertile meadows, they are now too far deteriorated to be reclaimable by man, nor can they become again fitted for human use. Except through great geological changes, or other mysterious influences or agencies of which we have no present knowledge, and over which we have no prospective control. The earth is fast becoming an unfit home for its noblest inhabitant, and another era of equal human crime and human improvidence, and of like duration with that through which traces of that crime and that improvidence extend, would reduce it to such a condition of impoverished productiveness, of shattered surface, of climatic excess, as to threaten the deprivation, barbarism, and perhaps even extinction of the species.
Again, very powerful writing here. There are many examples of human destructiveness given in this paragraph. And George Perkins Marsh actually talks about some areas that are totally desolated and, in his opinion, are similar to the surface of the moon. So, what a great comparison. So, another thing that kind of striking here, he is talking about human crime against nature. And think about it. This is written in 1800s, and he is very concerned about this desolation, about impoverished productiveness of land, and even the climatic excess, right? So we are talking about the climate change, but look, in 1800s, people like George Perkins Marsh were already concerned about humans changing the climate. Isn't it amazing? So now George Perkins Marsh are asking us a question. So is it really so bad? Is there anything we can do? And in his opinion, there is still some hope left. And there are some examples when humans were able to take care of nature, and there are some signs of physical improvement. So let's continue reading.
True, there is a partial reverse to this picture. On narrow theaters, new forests have been planted, inundations of flowing streams restrained by heavy walls of masonry and other constructions, torrents compelled to aid, by depositing the slime with which they are charged, in filling up lowlands, and raising the level of morasses which their own overflows had created, ground submerged by the encroachments of the ocean, or exposed to be covered by its tides, has been rescued from its dominion by diking, swamps, and even lakes have been drained, and their beds brought within the domain of agricultural industry. Drifting coast dunes have been checked and made productive by plantation, seas and inland waters have been repeopled with fish, and even the sands of the Sahara have been fertilized by artesian fountains. These achievements are more glorious than the proudest triumphs of war, but, thus far, they give but faint hope that we shall yet make full atonement for our spendthrift waste of the bounties of nature.
Here are the examples how humans actually can be prudent and how they can take care of nature by planting trees, like we are talking about plantation, and plantation will prevent soil erosion, etc., etc. So what does it tell us? If humans really want to, if there is a will, right, they can take care of nature.
I have remarked that the effects of human action on the forms of the Earth's surface could not always be distinguished from those resulting from geological causes. And there is also much uncertainty in respect to the precise influence of the clearing and cultivating of the ground, and of other choral operations, upon climate. It is disputed whether either the mean or the extremes of temperature, the periods of the seasons, or the amount or distribution of precipitation and of evaporation, in any country whose annals are known, have undergone any change during the historical period. It is, indeed, impossible to doubt that many of the operations of the pioneer settler tend to produce great modifications in atmospheric humidity, temperature, and electricity, but we are at present unable to determine how far one set of effects is neutralized by another, or compensated by unknown agencies. This question scientific research is inadequate to solve, for want of the necessary data, but well-conducted observation, in regions now first brought under the occupation of man, combined with such historical evidence as still exists, may be expected at no distant period to throw much light on this subject.
This is quite interesting paragraph, so let's think about it. So it tells us that future research will provide more information, will put more light on this subject. What kind of subject? Alright, so we are talking about here atmospheric humidity, temperature, electricity, right? And these are all the elements of weather and climate. And so, as you can see here, remember, the book was written in 1800s. However, George Perkins Marsh already raises the question of human modifying the climate. He said that this is an obvious fact. However, more study, more research is required to evaluate human impact on the climate change. And obviously, now, when we are in our 2020s, this is definitely is proven now that humans are changing the climate on the planet. And again, you can kind of feel why George Perkins Marsh is called the prophet of modern conservation, because he actually described lots of things that we are struggling now in respect to the nature and climate. So the next paragraph is going to describe Australia, which is a continent that again was explored by Europeans, and originally it was a British colony. And obviously Australia has absolutely unique climate and absolutely unique flora and fauna, very interesting animals such as marsupials, including kangaroos, that don't live anywhere else on the planet. So let's read about Australia.
Australia is, perhaps, the country from which we have a right to expect the fullest elucidation of these difficult and disputable problems. Its colonization did not commence until the physical sciences had become matter of almost universal attention, and is, indeed, so recent that the memory of living men embraces the principal epochs of its history. The peculiarities of its fauna, its flora, and its geology are such as to have excited for it the liveliest interest of the votaries of natural science. Its minds have given its people the necessary wealth for procuring the means of instrumental observation, and the leisure required for the pursuit of scientific research, and large tracts of virgin forest and natural meadow are rapidly passing under the control of civilipede man. Here, then, exist greater facilities and stronger motives for the careful study of the topics in question than have ever been found combined in any other theater of European colonization.
According to George Perkins Marsh, Australia can be also studied to evaluate human impact during European colonization.
In North America, the change from the natural to the artificial condition of terrestrial surface began about the period when the most important instruments of meteorological observation were invented. The first settlers in the territory now constituting the United States and the British American provinces had other things to do than to tabulate barometrical and thermometrical readings, but there remain some interesting physical records from the early days of the colonies, and there is still an immense extent of North American soil where the industry and the folly of man have as yet produced little appreciable change. Here, too, with the present increased facilities for scientific observation, the future effects, direct and contingent, of man's labors, can be measured, and such precautions taken in those rural processes which we call improvements, as to mitigate evils, perhaps, in some degree, inseparable from every attempt to control the action of natural laws.
I wanted to remind you that we're already familiar with the first people who left documented concerns about environmental degradation in the North Americas. It was the colonial administrators, French and British colonial administrators. And this is what is emphasized in this paragraph. And George Perkins Marsh tells us that this kind of studies and observations have to continue so we can evaluate the effect of humans on nature to the fullest extent.
The geological, hydrographical, and topographical surveys which almost every general and even local government of the civilized world is carrying on, are making yet more important contributions to our stock of geographical and general physical knowledge, and, within a comparatively short space, there will be an accumulation of well-established constant and historical facts, from which we can safely reason upon all the relations of action and reaction between man and external nature. But we are, even now, breaking up the floor and wainscoting and doors and window frames of our dwelling, for fuel to warm our bodies and seethe our pottage, and the world cannot afford to wait till the slow and sure progress of exact science has taught it a better economy. Many practical lessons have been teamed by the common observation of unschooled men, and the teachings of simple experience, on topics where natural philosophy has scarcely yet spoken, are not to be despised.
So what is the conclusion here? Obviously, it's important to continue research and collect information documenting the human impact on the environment. However, as George Perkins Marsh tells us, we don't really have time. We have to take action now, and we have to take care of the natural resources and nature, because we cannot wait to design a better economy. We may just simply exhaust all our natural resources and ruin the planet, and then we are in trouble. So I hope this brief introduction to Man and Nature by George Perkins Marsh give you some food for thoughts, and you can really appreciate his prophecy and relate his writing to contemporary state of affairs. This is going to be all for now, and if you have questions, you know how to get in touch with me. I will talk to you soon.